make me brand new. Lord, I'm ready for change. I can't keep living like this. I don't wanna be the same. Lord, I'm ready for change. From the inside out, I don't wanna be the same.
Welcome to Ready for Change. My name is Simone Elbow. I'm your host, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our show one more time. And we are talking about men, women, and feminism. If you've been following what we've been doing, we've started something that we call the Good Man Campaign. And that's where we want to talk about how we can support, understand, and respect our men and improve our relationships between men and women in particular. As you know, relationships can be really rewarding and they can also be really challenging. And there's really been a great divide between men and women. We've become polarized. And women are in their corner and men are in their corner. And, it seems like the chasm is getting wider and deeper. And so the whole purpose behind the Good Man Campaign is to really get a better understanding of who we are as genders and how we can understand each other better and relate to each other better, as opposed to being competitors and enemies, standing off against each other, but working together to build better families, to build better relationships, to raise wholesome, healthy, emotionally whole children, and in turn to build better communities and better workplaces, because it really makes no sense, all of the bickering and the fighting. Sometimes it's really just because we don't want to let go of our positions. And we just allow things to get haywire because no one wants to give in. No one wants to say, you know what, I understand your perspective and I see where you're coming from. It's not really about right or wrong. It's just about understanding, respect, and support. And so I'm really happy about the show tonight because I have an expert guest who truly is an expert guest in her field. And someone that I've met over the last couple of years and who has become a great friend, a confidant, and a mentor. She's definitely someone that I look up to and I can learn so much from, and I have already learned so much from, and who's encouraged me and supported me and pushed me and affirmed me as a person and as a woman. And she's definitely someone that I truly admire, her strength and her mind, her intellect, and her directness. She's someone who is definitely, what you see is what you get. You're going to get complete honesty. And so our guest tonight is Professor Jean Golden. She is a human rights activist and public educator in Canada, Kenya, and the Bahamas. She's taught at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada for 40 years, specializing in women's studies, race and racism, globalization and underdevelopment, and human rights. Professor Golden has held several senior university positions: the chair of the Department of Sociology, senior administrator of the first Ryerson University Anti-Discrimination and Human Rights Department, and director of the Ryerson Caribbean Research Center. Her research is community-based, ranging from gender equity and forms of sexual violence, biracial identity formation, and disability rights, to collaborative international community engagement. She has lived and traveled extensively in the Caribbean, held a visiting research fellowship at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, and led the creation of Caribbean Studies at Ryerson University. Professor Golden may be best described as a critical educator and social activist. She brings people together to change lives. Education is not neutral for her. It is not housed in an ivory tower. It is focused on social justice through social activism. For her, the classroom and academic research must be connected to the community in order for her students and community members to understand the changing world and their location within it, and for them to become global citizens. For example, Professor Golden has produced a range of educational community resources, including teaching Black history to kids, anti-racism and anti-sexism practices, a women's television show, Misuse of Madame, an educational website, and 12 mini documentaries on development issues in Kenya, and more importantly, and recently in Abaco in the Bahamas, educational materials for children, parents, and community on disability rights. She has taught sociology in the community to disadvantaged youth and immigrant women, and Black history in the primary public school system. On particular relevance to today's show, Professor Golden was a pioneer in women and gender issues since the 1970s. She developed Ryerson's first women's studies course in the 1970s. She teaches 2 university courses in this area, Women, Power and Change, and Women and Human Rights. She has delivered workshops and conference papers on gender issues across Canada and internationally. She developed employment and educational equity policies, including the first Ontario University Employment Equity Hiring Program for women in the 1990s, and has received several awards for her human rights activism. Recently, in 2013, Professor Golden received the Ryerson University prestigious Chancellor Award of Distinction, conferred on an educator recognized as an exemplary model of lifelong career excellence and leadership in human rights education, teaching, and learning. Included in this award was recognition of her pioneering work in human rights within the university and in the broader community. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners, this is such a privilege to be able to interview Professor Jean Golden on our topic for tonight, Men, Women, and Feminism. We'll be right back after this short break.
The Queen Esther Radio Show is live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join me, Jessica Taylor,
and me, Jason Mosley, to be entertained by authors, artists, and spiritual leaders.
We look forward to being a blessing in your life every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Only on the MWHY Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Rita Ricks, host of Spirit Journeys Radio, and I'm really looking forward to discussing June's theme, which is entitled Being Fearless. Just imagine what your life might be like if you could move further from your fear and closer toward your future. I invite and encourage you to tune in on Tuesday evenings, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, to hear me and my guests discuss how to get past the fear, how to make the move, and how to live. Spirit Journeys Radio is about transforming your thinking and your behavior. Join me, and together, let's make this transition happen. I'm Rita, speaking to your spirit.
If you're the parent of a child with behavioral challenges that has been suspended, expelled, or just not able to make it in a traditional school setting, there is an alternative. Call the Metropolitan Day School today. Licensed and accredited grades K through 12. Call 804-321-2595. Financial assistance and after-school programs are available. Let's turn this school year around right now at the Metropolitan Day School, where Eagles Soar. Call Ms. Thomas today, 804-321-2595.
I am so pleased to welcome to Ready for Change today someone who I've known for a couple of years now, but it feels like longer because we certainly have connected. And I'm really honored that she has consented to be a part of this Good Man campaign and movement. And because of her background in human rights, international development, women's studies, feminism, race and racialization and diversity issues, I felt that she could bring to the conversation a global context of what we're talking about as it relates to gender roles, gender relations, and how we can get an understanding of the genders both individually and collectively. And so I am so honored to welcome to Ready for Change Professor Jean Golden. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simone, and I hope you're going to call me Jean throughout the show.
I will, with your permission. Thank you. I certainly will do so. So, Jean, tell us a bit more about yourself, because, of course, I would have read a bit of your background, which is so impressive, of the work that you're doing, not only in Canada, but in the Bahamas and in Africa. And so tell us a bit about who you are. Who is Professor Jean Golden, and how did you get into your activism and research and teaching in feminism and all the other broader subjects?
Big question.
Big question.
So I'll start with, I'm a human rights activist. I've been teaching at the university level for over 40 years. And my work has shifted from community activism in Toronto and then Canada to now in Kenya and in the Bahamas. So I'll come back to that. But if you ask me how I got there, I think I got there by being born in a poor farm rural background just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Being born female at a time when women were facing severe disadvantages and girls were facing severe disadvantages in the society and in the school system. Being born into a mixed religious family, Christian and Jewish, and facing the discrimination that came from that. And as I began to grow up, I started to ask myself questions. Why I was being told as a poor person and why I was being told as a female that I could not do. And for some reason, and my daughter, who is now 24, makes jokes about this because she heard me do a talk on it once, I said, just watch me. And I spent my high school years and my early university years saying, when people said to me, you cannot do that because you are female. You cannot do that because of the background you're from. You cannot do that because you are a Jew. I would just say, watch me, and I would do it. So in that process that began as an individual rebellion, I began to look for the questions that would help me understand why as a woman I was being told this, why as a poor woman I was being told this, why as a woman coming from a mixed religious background I was being told this. And when I learned how to ask the right questions, I began to find the answers. And so I became involved in the feminist movement in North America and in Canada. I became involved in the anti-racist movement. I became involved in the anti-homophobia movement. I became involved in the broader movement against social inequality in my own country and worldwide, and eventually led me to then be doing projects, one in Kenya and one in the Bahamas.
Tell us a bit more about the projects that you're doing in Kenya and the Bahamas.
So in the Bahamas, I met Lynn Majors, who is the principal and administrator of Every Child Counts School for Children with Special Needs in Abaco. And that was about 4 years ago, although I'd been coming to Abaco since the 80s. And I realized that the university that I work at, Ryerson University, had the capacity to provide her with some trained assistance. We have programs in early childhood studies and disability studies and social work, all of which require students to do placements as part of their degree. So Lynn Majors and myself, with the help of the Catholic School Board, created an institutional contract between the university and ECC, and we now bring down every May and June students ranging from 9 to 21, although I think we're going to keep it smaller from now on, who go into the classroom, who are trained in disabilities, who do program development, community development, They're trained in that as social workers or as early childhood studies students. And I try to teach my students to give back. If you have the privilege of going to a university, you have a responsibility to give back. But when you give back, when you enter into a social location which is different than your own, you do it in a collaborative way. You ask people, what is it you need and what is it we could do to help? So the students are learning that in their early 20s, and they will carry that back into any kind of work they do. I also more recently have set up a credit course called International Community Engagement, where I bring down 24 Ryerson students to Every Child Counts and to Marsh Harbor and Abaco. I have invited in community leaders from the Bahamas, most from Abaco, but I've also have Keith Lee Woodworth, who is the Director of Graduate Studies at the College of the Bahamas, and he and I have an idea that down the road we'd like to bring College of the Bahamas students to join with the Canadian students so they can teach one another. But the students are there to learn about development issues as defined by Bahamians, for Bahamians, and also to do some work inside the school. So that project just continues to grow and grow, and I've become involved indirectly with the Disability Commission. I was involved indirectly with some feedback on the Disability Act. So it's like a mini octopus that just goes in the direction that Abaco defines for myself and my students. So that's one area, and I love it, and I love the Bahamas. And every time I'm here, I learn more and more, and I'm getting more involved in trying to understand how the Bahamas is structured politically, economically, socially. It's a big thing. Every time I learn something new, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. More and more questions. That's one. The other one is in Kenya, and that's also something that I just tripped over. I had a friend who had set up a very small NGO in a village in northeastern Kenya called Kithuya, and she began by her and her friends sponsoring young girls and boys who are orphaned from HIV to go to school, and then thought about what is it she could contribute to the community, and she found out that they were in a severe famine, in a severe drought, and found solar cookers, and worked out with the community would they like to try the solar cookers. She found a way of training the members of the community themselves so they teach other members. They now have every member of the village, about 700 who have solar cookers. The village now wants to create their own solar cooker business. So Ryerson University has become involved in that because we have MBAs in business. We're going to help them develop the feasibility plan and learn how to do the business, help them learn how to do the business as we also learn how to do it with them. And then on the educational side, we do sponsorships for young girls and boys to go all the way through school into university. First university graduates now happening after 8 years, 3 more are in university. They're going to become involved with the business plan to create the business. And we've now started to record little mini documentaries on the impact of solar cookers on the community. Women and children are safer. They don't go out to collect food. They're not being attacked by human beings or animals. The water's clean. The food is clean. Typhoid, cholera has gone down. The environment is regenerating. They now have plants that are growing, which is holding the soil so it doesn't blow away. And there's something about the trees being there that creates more rain. So in general, things are getting better for the community. And I just tripped over that and then created an academic website for them. And I'm also involved in the videos and found funding for them. So we have a website now on Kenya called www.kenyavillageproject.org. And you can go on the site. You can find academic materials about solar technologies, about the education of the girl child, including female genital mutilation and arranged marriages. The videos are all sitting there, and we are now creating educational modules. So the website will be sent across Canada to academics in high schools and universities and colleges, and across Kenya to academics in universities, colleges, and high schools, so that the material can be taught, and the modules will be set there showing how to teach the materials.
That is fantastic. Oh my gosh. How does it feel to be involved in such monumental projects and all very different in their scope?
It makes me feel that coming from poverty and having the advantage to go to university, I was at the right place in the right time, and my family fought very hard for me to go to school, and beginning to understand what poverty means and what inequity means, and in the case of disability in the Bahamas, or in the case of education and income in Kenya, that if I have access to that knowledge and I have access to the people who can help, and if the communities ask for assistance, then it makes me feel good to give back. I get more, I think, from doing this than what people themselves get. Because I think that, yes, I can make a little bit of difference somewhere in the world, but I can do it in a way that's not exploitative or oppressive or offensive.
Exactly. And so that leads us into our topic for tonight, which is a heavy-duty topic, but one that I think is important. As I said before, this project for me is evolving into something much more than I even anticipated, because I think it's going to spark a conversation that we need to have. And so some things we may have shied away from that I feel that we need to kind of push the envelope and at least open awareness and talk about some things. So our topic is men, women, and feminism. Woo, the F word.
The good F word.
A good F word, right?
Mm-hmm.
And an F word that has gotten a very bad rap over the years. And
it has.
We want to kind of talk about what it really is, dispel some of the myths, and really get into what is happening around the world as it relates to feminism and equality and how it's evolved over the years. So I will ask the first question to get you going, because I know this is going to spark a whole lot of the depth of your knowledge. But what is feminism?
So feminism is a social movement, a collection of progressive women with the assistance of some men that wants to change the relationships between men and women in the society at all levels, from the institutional structural level like the state, religion, mass media, education, down at the interpersonal level, relationships between men and women, women and women, men and men in the personal realm. And that movement began in the 1800s, originally in the developing capitalist societies, many of whom were colonial societies. And women began to ask very fundamental questions why they couldn't have and do some of the same things that men were doing. So I'll take my own country as an example of that, but I can expand it worldwide for you as we go through this. So in Canada in the 1850s, many black men and women were coming up from the United States through the Underground Railroad, because Canada did not have institutionalized slavery in the same way that the United States did, and was creating a relatively safe haven, even though there was discrimination. Racism existed everywhere in North America, but a safe haven where people could come and not be re-enslaved. And black women at the time who became involved in community work, and the feminist movement really has not paid attention to this until recently, began to want similar kinds of privileges that they saw more broadly in the society that white women had, but also that men, black and white men, had. And one of them was realizing that if you wanted to influence things that were happening in the society, you had to be able to vote. Fundamentally, you had to have the vote. So that began in the late 1800s, organizations of black women in Canada and organizations of white women who began to work to give themselves some kind of political power through the vote, so they could influence social policy and they could influence what kinds of decisions the government was going to make. So that was the beginning. Equality rights, formal equality rights, sameness as men to have the vote. They also wanted to own property as men could own property. They wanted to be able to go to university as men could go to university. So privileged women wanted access to that. So what's called the first wave of feminism was really women with the support of some men asking for basic civil rights. So in my own country, getting the vote didn't happen until the early 1900s, and it happened because of World War I, because women were involved in World War I. Men went off to fight. Women did the work that men used to do, so suddenly people began to get, women can do stuff. It took a real structural change for that to happen. And by 1918, 1920, women had vote at the federal level in our country. Other countries came later in giving the vote to women. Worldwide, it took more time, but the First World War really began to drive that. And then what women found out, say in my own country, is that they weren't persons. They had less protection under the law than animals did. So women didn't become persons in Canada until 1929.
Good grief.
So my mother, who was born in Canada, my father was not a person.
Wow.
So each country has its own point at which women began to ask for fundamental sameness, fundamental rights similar to men. And that's true for the Bahamas, if you look right now, where women and some men are arguing that women should be, and men should be treated the same in the Constitution, because there's differences for both in the Constitution.
Correct.
So that argument is playing through for you now. In my own country, it played through earlier. So in 1982, when we did constitutional changes, we had a clause that said, notwithstanding anything else, men and women are equal. I would expect that's probably going to happen in the Bahamas after you work out some of the political issues that are connected to that and people begin to understand it better. Yes. So you're on a roll that we were on a roll. Different countries do it at different points.
Right.
So that first wave of feminism was really about basic civil and political rights. And those rights got enshrined at the United Nations level, because when the nation states of the world began to come together after World War II, they began to, through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and through a variety of other laws, conventions, set out women should have same fundamental rights. And that was a process. More and more countries joined the UN, more and more laws were developed, more and more countries signed on to those laws and then promised they'd go back in their own country and do something about it. The Bahamas is part of that process today, as Canada is part of that process. So that was really the first beginning of feminism, men and women trying to say, we want the same fundamental human rights and responsibilities for men and women. And then it began to shift, which is in my generation then, who were called the baby boomers, when the war was over and people began to have babies again because they felt more stable in the now more advanced capitalist societies and then beginning around the world, but really coming from war. Then that generation came through at a time when educational doors were opening up. So my generation had the ability to go to school. Women had the ability, females, to go to school. And it was at a time when there were a lot of human rights movements in the world, like the anti-colonial movement, native rights movement, the civil rights movement in the United States, the anti-war movement in Vietnam, a variety of movements where people were beginning to say everyone's entitled to the same kind of fundamental human rights. And the light bulb went on for females. They suddenly realized that the analysis about oppression and exploitation applied to them too. And they started to talk to one another, which were at that point called consciousness-raising circles, but talk to one another about what was similar in their lives, what kinds of difficulties they were facing in relationship to men at the structural level of power and in their personal lives. And in doing that, they began to identify some common problems that women were facing in their own countries and around the world. So they began to name them. They then began to develop theories to explain why these things were happening. They then began to study it. So they had data to show, yes, in fact, this is really what's happening. And then they developed strategies for change. So that was really the second wave of feminism, and not all women and men agreed on the understandings or the strategies, what to do about it, but they knew there was a problem. Right? And human beings were trying to work out what one should be doing about it. And that really went through most of the developed societies and began to expand up then into the developing societies in the latter part of the 20th century, and now has carried over into the 21st century. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about a third wave of feminism.
Right, I was going to ask that.
Yes, but some people say it's just an extension of what went before. I don't think the naming matters. What I think matters is that more and more people are beginning to understand that women are part of the human species, that they are entitled to have access to the same power, privileges, and prestige that men have, that yes, women are different from men in some ways, but they're not unequal to men. And in different parts of the world, it's happening at different levels. So you can have in Afghanistan young girls fighting for the right to go to school. You may have in another country like Ireland beginning to do the struggle around should you have abortion and under what conditions, to another country doing a struggle around should there be same-sex marriage, which is all part of gender relations, to another country maybe talking about should women be the head of the Supreme Court. Each country is different in working out what kind of issue they're going to work at one point.
Right.
At what point.
So what does that represent then on a global level? And you mentioned the United Nations, and you know there are some conventions, maybe you can explain some of these terms as we go along. Okay. You know, what are conventions, and what role does the United Nations play in impacting these types of legislations on more of a local level?
So the UN is, I do teach about international human rights law, and I teach about how it applies to women, but you can't talk about that without talking about men. Right. You cannot talk about half the population without talking about the other half. So when I mentioned earlier that the UN was involved in what was called formal equality, wanting men and women to be treated the same, and the world's nations signed on to that. In the 80s, as a result of the developing thinking that was coming from the civil rights movement and from the feminist movement, people began to recognize that you can't always argue that men and women, or if we take the civil rights movement in the United States, black and white, are always the same. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're members of the human species, but there are also some differences that you carry from the historical disadvantage. So when you talk about women, it wasn't until the 1980s that the United Nations began to really look seriously at how women were different from men, how their situations were not always identical to men, and it usually is connected around the biological function. That men and women are different when it comes to reproductive function. Mm-hmm. Men participate for a short period of time in the production of the child, sometimes a few minutes, but women carry the babies to term. Women lactate the babies. The responsibility for the early child rearing is given to women in most societies in the world. So the reproductive function is different. And then there is also a recognition that in 1% of human history, the most recent part of human history, that women have been seen as being different from and unequal to men, and there are historical reasons for that. And that's led to women having less access to power in the society, making decisions in religion, in the state, in the mass media, in the educational system. Women being valued less, having less prestige, and women having less access to privileges. Whatever opportunities are available and rewards are available in the society, women had less access to that. So when that began to be understood, as women driving this movement with the help of some men began to understand this, international law began to change. At the international level, they created the first international law called the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Mm-hmm. And a convention means that if you say yes to it and you ratify it, it means that you're promising to go back into your own country and to implement that convention in your own country. And it's different than a declaration. A declaration says, really, if you vote for that, oh, this is a really good idea, and I like it, but it doesn't mean you have to go back in your country and do something about it. Ah. So a convention means you're committed, you're joining the international community who's committed, and you're going to bring your country in line with it. So that was the first international law that began to recognize that there are things in the lives of women which are different than in the lives of men, and it needs special attention. Right. But they didn't recognize violence. So even in the 80s, they didn't recognize violence was a serious issue. Gendered violence, sexual violence was a serious issue. Mm-hmm. So that was followed by, but watch the language, a declaration on the elimination of violence against women. Mm-hmm. So at the political level, they were not sure that they could get the nation states to ratify and say, yes, this is a law, and yes, we'll take it back home. So they took the feel-good, yes, we think this is important route, and did a declaration. That was then followed by an international meeting in Beijing. I'm going to forget the year. I think it was in 90 or 95, where they created the Beijing Declaration that carried on talking about women's rights and really integrating in broader issues of violence in all its forms and how it is a major world issue. So it's a progression. So when we get up to today in the 21st century, we have laws on sexual trafficking, we have conventions on sexual trafficking, we have conventions on the rights of the child, we have conventions sitting there on drugs and organized crime and how that impacts upon women and children. Mm-hmm. So a variety, and women and children in armed struggle. Right. So as social conditions change and as people begin to ask the right questions about the social condition, the UN responds with conventions, laws, or treaties, which are laws, or declarations. So that's the international level.
Which is stronger or has more
Conventions
influence?
and treaties, they're laws.
Okay.
If you sign on, the Bahamas signed on to CETA, it's supposed to come back in here and do something about it. So if you sign on to equality rights at CETA, then you got to come in and look at your constitution and fix inequality sitting in your constitution. That's the expectation.
So is there a timeline, or is there any sense of accountability to make sure that the countries actually do this?
As I understand it, the timeline is worked out by the country, and they do reports to the UN, and the UN Human Rights Commissions can hold the country accountable for any breaches that it sees happening inside the country.
Really?
Yes.
And
now, hold accountable, it doesn't mean they're going to kick you out of the UN, because that's not the general way, but if I use my own country, we have a very clear example of how the Canadian state discriminates against Aboriginal women. So if you as an Aboriginal woman marry someone who's non-Aboriginal, up until very recently, you no longer were Aboriginal and your children were not Aboriginal. But if men outmarried and married a non-Aboriginal woman, that woman could become Aboriginal, First Nations, and the children become First Nations. Aboriginal women took it to the United Nations. The United Nations did a very strong statement about discrimination by the Canadian state. The Canadian state then changed the law, but not totally changed it. So they brought back in some of these women, but they didn't go all the way back the way they did with men. So once again, Aboriginal people are fighting to end this kind of gender discrimination in the law.
Yeah, which is kind of what we're involved in right now in the Bahamas.
It's public shaming.
Yes.
Right, but at an international level.
Right, yes. Right.
Because you want to be a member of the Organization of States. It's an honor to be part of the Organization of States.
Mm-hmm. And so that would give a country some pressure to make sure that they are in compliance and aligned with the other nations.
Yeah, another example is how you had a human rights group from the Bahamas go recently to the Organization of the American States with some concerns about human rights abuses against Haitians because of changes in government law and policy.
Right.
So that is playing its way out too, because you go to the international level and then you have committees who come into the country and they write reports, and all of that is part of bringing nation states into the nationhood of states.
Right.
So that we have a standard of human rights that applies to everybody in the world.
Right. Very good. So talk about how the feminist movement plays out now in the 21st century. You talked about the waves of feminism. How is that actually playing out now? And I know it varies from country to country, but what are we seeing now as top trends in feminism?
It depends. It depends, again, on which countries, because some countries are more ahead in the process than others. But I think because of social media, you think about the impact of social media, that you can read what's happening anywhere at any time. Mm-hmm. When the Arab Spring was happening, we saw that. We saw these huge upheavals that were happening in the Arab world around democracy rights. Or when Afghanistan, when the young woman was almost killed and her other friends were killed for going to school, that was carried around the world. Mm-hmm. So we now have more knowledge of what's going on. So in terms of the trends, to come back to your question, some of the rights that we take for granted on this side of the world, the right to vote, mm-hmm. the right to own property, the civil, very basic civil and political rights, still don't exist in some countries in the world today. So they're fighting for those fundamental rights. Right. Some of the rights around a woman's control of her reproductive capacity, mm-hmm. that this is her body and she has to make some decisions about if and when she wants to be pregnant, with whom, under what conditions, what kind of assistance she needs from the state. That varies, again, from country to country, but there's a general understanding that women should have some control over who has access to their body. So a concrete example would be how in Kenya, arranged marriages between young girls once they reach puberty and men who are 30, 40 years older than them is now being questioned in traditional tribal societies. It never was before.
Right.
Or in some societies, divorce was never allowed before. You had to have fault divorce. Now you have some countries that have no fault divorce, and either party can say, I want to be divorced, and you can do it your own without having to bring in all kinds of lawyers. Each country works out its own way to address issues around women controlling their own bodies, women having basic fundamental civil and political rights, women being able to work, women being able to get educated, women being able to be advanced, women being paid the same that men are paid, women being free of sexual violence in all its form, whether it's domestic violence, child abuse, children being free of being beaten up. All those are growing trends in the world, but they all have their base in the feminist movement. And I would argue, connected to your show, to bring it back, the whole discussion about gender roles. What are gender roles? Yes. What does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? What's the interconnection between them? All is rolling out from the feminist movement that identified the problems, created the theory to explain the problems, and then said, what do we need to do about it? The fact that men now are examining their role as men comes from that worldwide movement.
Wow. And so I guess that leads to the question then, why is feminism misunderstood by both men and women, right? Because, of course, there are some stereotypes around feminism and feminists. So, for instance, would you say that you are a feminist?
Absolutely. I'm a supporter of fundamental human rights for men and women. I'm a supporter of addressing those structures that prevent that from happening. I want men and women to have the capacity to examine what it means to be male and female, and to look at the gender boxes into which we are fixed, and are they preventing us from being our authentic self in relationship to other people, and if so, why and what can we do about it? Right. So yes, I own the label, and what I find with my students, because I've been teaching over 40 years now, what I find with my students, because I'm a sociologist, so I teach courses in introductory sociology, I've taught course on women, power and change, women and human rights, development and underdevelopment. I find when I ask, and I do it anonymously, I ask them to write it out at the beginning of the year, do you call yourself a feminist, males and females? Right? And most say no. By the end of the year, most say yes, because they now understand that it's a social movement and what it involves, and they're not afraid to claim the label. For young women, there's an American feminist called Gloria Steinem. She was the original founder that some of your audience may know of, Ms. Magazine, which was the first North American feminist magazine. And she's a wonderful writer, and she wrote an article really talking about why is it that young women don't own the label. And she said it's because when they are coming out of high school and if they have the opportunity to go on to college or university, they are in the sexual marketplace. This is where they're looking to find their Prince Charming. You don't find Prince Charming, they believe, if you set yourself up as somebody who's questioning gender relations, because they've learned the stereotype that feminists are ball-breaking, authoritarian, hairy armpits, which might be okay in your culture, but in other cultures are not, hairy legs, brutal, lesbian, the assumption being made that they're lesbian. So all these stereotypes that have nothing to do with the great variety of women and men who support fundamental equality rights for women. Right. So when that's the image that the media portrays, that you hear other people talking about, and somebody says to you, are you a feminist? They're not going to claim it if they think it's going to push the man off them. And I gave you an example when you and I were talking privately, that I know from my student evaluations, which are fine, but the one word that comes up all the time when they get to write extra stuff, really enjoyed her course, really knows her stuff, but she's intimidated. So I ask my students at the beginning of the class, I say, I want you to know this is what people before you have said, but I also want to ask you, if this were a man standing in front of you who knew his material, who had taught for this many years, who is committed to what they're doing, who really wanted you to understand the material, would you say that man was intimidating? And they say to me, no. It's because it's the female body, and I dress in a feminine way, right? So it's the female body that's saying this, and they don't expect the female body to be doing that.
Right. So how, and I don't want to stray off, but this is a part of addressing these stereotypes and getting people to at least come to an understanding of what feminism is. It is not forcing people to embrace it in whatever way. But how do we get that understanding of how a woman can, in a healthy way, demonstrate that sense of power and assertiveness or assertion that is misconstrued as the dominance and the aggression and that you want to downplay men and all that sort of thing, or that you have to be like a man to be successful in today's world. What are some healthy manifestations or expressions of that?
I think you have to begin by asking what does it mean in your particular culture? The Bahamas would be different than my culture, Canadian culture. What does it mean to be a man and a woman? Mm-hmm. And where does that come from? And who benefits from that definition of what it is for the box for the man and what it is for the box for the woman? Mm-hmm. So if we look historically at how these gender roles were developed, that a woman's place is in the home, mm-hmm. in the private realm, looking after the family, looking after the kids, mm-hmm. and if she works, she's there to supplement the income of the man who's supposed to take care of the family. Mm-hmm. That was really the prescribed role. Even though that may not be what's actually happening, that's what women were taught. So if we look in the early development of capitalism, women have always worked. Working class women have always worked. Racialized women have always worked. If we look at slavery or we look at colonialism. Mm-hmm. But the image of what it was to be a woman comes from the dominant class. And the dominant class are those who own and control the industries, and in the case of slavery, and also own and control the workforce, have control over the men and the women. So when you look at who has the economic power, and if they could support to keep their woman in the home and to have slaves and or hard workers to work with them, that becomes the dominant ideology of what a man's role is, which is to take care of, and what a woman's role in the public realm, and a woman's role is in the private realm, to look after the man and the kids. Even though in reality women have always been out there working and have always been doing the work. Because the dominant class influences how we see the world. Right. They have that power. Right. And it plays out through the dominant institutions, and in the case in the earlier years through religion, because mm-hmm. religion itself has strong views about what's appropriate male and female behavior. Mm-hmm. Varying from society to society and religion to religion, but patriarchy is pretty strong. Male dominance is pretty strong in that institution and is strong in all the other major institutions. Mm-hmm. So you begin with trying to understand, where does this come from? Mm-hmm. And then look at what's the consequence. If you pigeonhole women to a particular kind of box and you pigeonhole men to another kind of box, any time that you see a variety of behavior, for example, men, right. which is not about being strong and being dominant and being controlling and competitive, and yes, you can express emotion through anger, but you cannot really express fear or pain or crime, because that makes you too much like a woman who's allowed to do that.
Right. Absolutely.
When you have those kinds of very strict definitions for men, what happens to many men who don't fit in that very tight definition of what it means to be a man? They can't be who they really are.
Exactly.
And then you look at women who are told, well, you must be dependent upon, you must be passive, you can be emotional, but you're not as smart as, you're not as good as a competition, you can't be a leader, you're not organized. Men do that. Mm-hmm. What happens to those women who have those capacities? They themselves can't be it.
Yes.
So when you look at that, you say, well, who benefits from this? Well, if you're telling women that their place is in the home to do this unpaid labor, and if they come out of the home, well, it's okay, you can come out of your home and do it with extension of the labor in the home. You can be the cooks and the seamstress and the helpers and the secretaries, the administrative assistants and the nurses and the teachers, everything that's an extension. Mm-hmm. And because you are valued less than men, we're going to pay you less. Even if you're doing a job that's relatively the same as what another man is doing in terms of responsibility, working conditions, education, risk, even if you're doing a job category that's relatively the same, we're still going to pay you less. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing the same job as the man, if you're both doing identical work, we're still going to pay you less. So who benefits from that? Well, men benefit because they get paid more. Those who own and control and run the businesses benefit because they got a cheap labor pool. The same way they benefit from paying black people less than what they pay white people. Mm-hmm. They benefit from it. Mm-hmm. Things don't continue unless somebody benefits from it. Yeah. And men benefit because they've got women to take care of them and the children, right? So why would they want to necessarily change that unless they begin to understand how rewarding and enriching it can be to spend time with your children. Mm-hmm. How enriching it can be to have a partner, whether it's a same-sex partner or a different-sex partner. We can get a whole other topic around homophobia in the Bahamas, but whatever it is, how enriching it is to have a life that you share with somebody else.
Right.
Where there's discussion and communication and give and take. That's not part of the gender script. So when you've got a class that benefits from exploiting women and racialized people, and when you've got men themselves who get some benefits because they get advanced more, they don't get sexually harassed the way women do. Women come out in the world of work, they get sexually harassed because you're being reminded you are primarily a sexual being.
Right.
You're not an equal worker, you're a sexual being. Every woman in the workforce can have some story about some kind of sexual harassment.
Oh, yes.
Men don't have as many stories. They can be sexually harassed
by
male bosses and by female bosses, but not to the same extent that women are.
No, because, I mean, and of course you experience it living for the periods of time that you do in the Bahamas, that sexual harassment is just walking down the street.
Yes.
And in actual fact, in preparing for this interview where we are right now, when you were off doing something and I was waiting for you, I was potentially harassed by an employee of the establishment where we are.
Yes. Your body is fair game because you're a
male
female.
person coming along and, again, under the guise of being friendly, right, comes along and says, are you from the island? So I said no. Right? Because I'm assuming that he meant one of our family islands, not Nassau. I'm not from one of those islands. So I said no. He didn't move away. He said, I just thought you were from an island because the islands have such pretty women. And so I said no. He said not Freeport or anything like that. He kept pressing. So in and of itself, the words are fine. Okay, so I'm taking this as an implied compliment that I'm pretty. Okay, fine, I can take that. But when you continue to press and like you're trying to initiate something, right? Like a conversation or to move that beyond, to get information from you, that would be constituted as harassment because it's unwanted. I do not want to enter this conversation with you. I've answered as much as I wanted to answer, but you continue to press. And in our culture, that is not seen as harassment, but it is.
Well, I think public harassment, so there's two kinds of harassment. Well, there's many kinds of harassment, but public harassment of public spaces where women's bodies and access to women is just considered to be fair game. And in some societies, it can be really serious. If you're not dressed in a particular way you're supposed to be, your body is fair game. I think for men, it can be confusing sometimes.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, if you see someone who's of interest to you, you want to be able to have the ability to show there's some interest, but it's learning the boundaries.
Exactly.
And each culture has, and women have to help with this too. Women have to learn to say to men when they're not interested, listen, I'm not interested.
Right.
Whatever you want to say, or I have a boyfriend, whatever I have, I'm not interested. Many times it carries on because women don't stand up and speak for themselves, and that can be confusing for men. So it can work both ways.
Right.
But certainly it is a gendered behavior. Males invade the public space of women more than women invade the public space of men. And that is worldwide that happens. But again, trying to figure out what the boundaries are.
Right.
So to go back, I think your question was around gender roles. And learning, we began by saying you have to learn where these roles come from, and then you have to examine these roles and say, do they benefit men and women in the current structure of the society? And sometimes, yes, gender roles can benefit one of the genders or the other gender, but at what price for everything else that goes with it?
Right.
So it's learning to be critical. And to do that, you have to have an educational system that teaches you critical thinking.
And not dependency.
If it doesn't do that, then you are learning ignorance. You've learned ignorance. And that's true in many educational systems. Are you really teaching children how to ask questions rather than learning by rote?
And discovery. Yes. And that's a whole other conversation, especially in our context in the Bahamas that I have strong views about. But it's amazing as you talk about gender roles. And as you were talking, I was just getting a mental picture even from my context, because I'm a 70s baby, so I would be considered a Generation X. But just when you think about, like from my parents' generation, people born in the 30s and so forth, and I look at the way the gender roles, especially for women, has changed. So for instance, if you think of way back when, even if you read those old romance novels, in those classical societies with the big gowns and all of that, it was a status symbol to be at home taken care
For
of.
rich people.
For rich people.
Yes, okay.
To be at
Rich
home
white people.
taken care of by your husband, right? Regardless as to whether how he had many other women or whatever. That was a whole other scenario. And moving forward, being a homemaker was considered a badge of honor. Moving forward even further, now that may be considered, well, no, I wouldn't say now. I would say maybe 20 years ago, that may have been considered, well, you should get out and work. Being a homemaker isn't considered a real profession or something that's noble for a woman to do. You should get out there and expand your mind and get an education and do all these other things. You're minimized if you're staying at home. Now I think more women are, I would prefer to be at home than to be battling a workplace and all the other issues, the glass ceiling.
Not
and
if you're
everything
dependent
else.
upon somebody else who tells you what to do.
Exactly, right? But I'm just bringing that to say that these roles for men and for women change so much. What does that mean then for societies and cultures as it continues
Societies
to evolve?
always change.
Yeah.
We are not the way we were 50 years, 100 years, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago when agriculture began. So the real thing about being human is we have the capacity to think about the world around us and decide whether we want to change it in some way. We do it on an individual level and we do it at a group level. Mm-hmm. That's what it means to be part of our species. We're a thinking species. Mm-hmm. So gender roles will always shift. They continue to shift as we become more educated and we begin to think about what's fair, what are fundamental human rights. I want to keep bringing it back. Mm-hmm. If we've got things in our gender roles that create harm for some, and either male or female, mm-hmm. that create limitations, that deny access to fundamental rights, deny the ability to be a responsible citizen, then because of our minds, we'll begin to question that and say, well, what mm-hmm. can we do about it? Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about, the shift away from the dominant ideology that a woman's place is in the home mm-hmm. to the economic reality that it takes two incomes to be able to meet the costs, sometimes even more with your kids yes. contributing to meet the costs that are required in the society, to we know that the rapidly changing ups and downs of capitalism throw people in and out of the labor force, and we've got to really find ways of sustaining ourselves and our families. So if one member of the family loses their job, there are others that are able to do it. Mm-hmm. It's the economics that drives a lot of the content of these gender roles. Yeah. So today, the reality is the more that women and men are educated, the more that women begin to enter into the world of work, the more they're going to have expectations about being treated fairly, mm-hmm. being paid the same, being able to advance, equal not being sexually harassed. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that will benefit. The thing that men themselves have to learn is that will benefit them if their daughters, if their wives, if their friends, if their girlfriends, if their mothers are treated fairly in the world of work. They're going to be happier back in the private realm. Mm-hmm. And if men begin to understand that in that private realm, they need to also be involved in sharing, as women are entering the public realm and bringing income in to share when you have relationships going on.
Right.
Then, I make this joke to my student. I say to my young male students, if you are heterosexual and you really see yourself in a committed relationship, if you learn to clean the toilets, if you learn to cook sometimes, if you learn what's required to raise your children, you're going to have a happier partner and you're going to have a happier sex life. The light bulb goes off for them. If you've got a partner who's stressed out, who thinks that you're sitting there watching soccer or basketball for 2-3 hours where she's got all this work to do, mm-hmm. she's going to be resentful. And you will not have the intimacy that you would like unless you force yourself upon her.
Mm-hmm. And that's very true. And as a matter of fact, we had this discussion just this week at work with some of my female colleagues who are married, are in committed relationships and whatnot. And it's the same thing. And they say they feel that they're always fussing, about something, about helping around the house and things like that. And that they feel that they're always working. And if it was just, as you said, just contributing a little bit in the home.
Contributing equally in the home.
Right.
Women carry 2 and 3 jobs. They have the responsibility, if they're working outside, they have the responsibility for the home. They look after the older generation, mm-hmm. the disabled generation, the ill, people who are ill. So they have a variety of additional jobs that are there beyond what many men have. I won't say all men because some men have also multiple things that are going on. Yeah. So it's It's really the genders trying to understand the changes that are happening in the world today and how behavior and attitudes has to adapt to that. Right. Nothing stays the same.
Not fixed in these boxes, but creating new boxes, perhaps. Right. Or creating new contexts of spaces rather than boxes.
Yes.
Because boxes are so limiting. I mean, creating new spaces in which we all have to interact.
Yes. It's redefining who you are in relationship to other people.
Yeah. So is there any such thing as gender equality?
Anywhere in the world today?
Anywhere.
Very rare. I think you'll find individual relationships where it's playing out, but if you're asking me at the structural level, no. The answer is no.
What does that mean, the structural level?
That means in all the major institutions where decisions are made which impact upon all of us who are not in those levels. So let me pick the state. Mm-hmm. So if you have in the world today, the majority of people who are in positions of power are males, who are seeing the world from their social location, which is different from a female social location, who are making laws and social policies based upon that. The chances of that reflecting the female voice is not high unless the government takes on a gender streaming approach, which is that every policy that you create, every law that you create, every social policy that flows from it, you take into account what's the impact upon males and females. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, you have a chance of seeing whether you're making a decision that's going to disadvantage one group or another. Mm-hmm. There are some societies, particularly Scandinavian societies, that have a higher rate of females who are in politics, and you will find in those countries there are many more family-friendly policies. Right. More time off when it comes to being pregnant for men and women and raising the children. Mm-hmm. Much longer period, more social services to support the family. In those countries where you have very few women who are in positions of power, you find fewer policies which are directed towards equity and equality and support of family structures. Right. We know that from the data. We can see that. Right. And there are gender indexes you can find online that talk about which countries are progressive around these issues and which aren't. So when I talk about power, are women involved in the decision-making in the educational system, in the government, in religion, in the mass media, in all the major institutions that impact upon us? The answer in the world today is, in the majority of countries, the answer is no. So if you're not important, especially in the economy, then that impacts upon what life is like for you in the private realm when you come to relationships. And when I made the comment earlier on, this is only 1% of human history that has seen men having more power, privilege, and prestige as a group compared to women. When we look at most hunting and gathering societies, I say most because not all, most hunting and gathering societies, women were the primary economic producers. They were the gatherers. They pulled in most of the food stuff. Men did do hunting. It was a natural division of labor because women can't run after or stalk an animal for a long period of time if they have a baby on their back who needs to breastfeed. So naturally they became the gatherers. But the society could not have survived without their participation in the economic realm. Right. So you found relative equality in these societies for 99% of human history. So here we are today in the 1%, which is the agricultural societies on, and we find that women are not seen as being primary economic producers. They're not seen as being essential to the economy, even though they do a lot of work. They don't own the property in most of the world's societies. They don't have the economic power. If you don't have the economic power, you can't make the decisions that are going to impact upon men and women and children in those societies.
So the women that we see today in these roles, because women have made, around the world, have made inroads in these structures, as you talk about. Do you think it's just tokenism, or are we really making strides as women for women?
No, I don't think it's just tokenism. It may begin like that, but when you have women who show that they are competent in a leadership role, it opens the doors for others. So my generation opened the doors for your generation, those who came afterwards. You don't have to fight as hard as I had to fight. I was the only female in graduate school. No male helped me or mentored me. It's very different today. Yes. Graduate schools have large numbers of females in it, and men and women are being helped in graduate schools or in apprenticeships. There are apprenticeship programs now for women. None of that existed before. So a pioneer may look like a token, but a pioneer can bring other pioneers along behind him or her to open up more and more doors.
Right.
So around the world, we're seeing that women can do leadership roles, and those women can be progressive or reactionary the same way that men can be progressive or reactionary.
Absolutely.
Just because you're a female doesn't mean that you're going to be any better than anybody else who's making decisions.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, you want to look at the character and the content of their ideas and what they're prepared to do about it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we will take a short break and we'll be right back. We are talking with Professor Jean Golden from Ryerson University, a human rights activist, and we're talking tonight on men, women, and feminism. We'll be right back after the break.
Hey, this is Coffee Black, coming through to bring you the latest in sports, celebrity, and entertainment news. Here's The Sip this week. So shout out to everyone that caught last week's slip on The Sip. Sierra had Russell Wilson pushing the baby stroller, not Westbrook. And Erykah Badu wants y'all all to know that she's just getting a little chunky, she ain't pregnant. Guess you gotta shut them rumors down early, y'all. And you know she's an artist and she's sensitive about her. So y'all know the girl that plays Denise on Mary Jane? Well, she got turned at a Waffle House and a video footage shows her ready to throw blows as security not so kindly escorts her to the door. Money can't backlash, y'all. And things are looking real rocky for Nicki and Meek Mill after he denied rumors of engagement. Then Nicki posted something about it's hard to love a damaged person and Meek kindly responded, get out your feelings. Well, that was quick. I'm just saying. Check out more on my site, thesipwithcoffeeblack.com, and tune in next week to The Sip with Coffee Black. No sugar, no cream.
Business owners, entrepreneurs, and professionals, improve your productivity and your life. You can accomplish this goal by enhancing your emotional intelligence. That's right. Let international emotional intelligence expert and author of the book Equilibrium, Yvette Beckel, help you to empower yourself, grow your people, build a strong business culture, and create lasting transformation. Buy Equilibrium online today at Amazon.com or visit 3ws.orgsoul.com. Once again, 3ws.orgsoul.com.
Are you frustrated, disappointed, discouraged with your life? Are you angry with God? What's holding you back from fulfilling your purpose? Are you struggling as a leader in ministry? Do you believe you have an end-time calling? If you answered yes to any of these questions, tune in to The Waymakers on MWHY Radio Network every other Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are here to support you. Join us to get the answers that will prepare the way of the Lord in your life.
And we are back. I hope you are enjoying this discussion as much as I am about feminism. Certainly dispelling some of the myths and stereotypes that have been engendered over the years, and really getting into the heart of rights, humanity, and how we ought to relate with each other. So I want to talk more about this whole thing of power and resulting powerlessness. But let's talk first of all about where has this need and drive for power come from? Power, whether that's in the personal realm or structural levels in the economy. Why do we have this drive for power?
I don't know if all of us have the drive for power, so let's start with what power is. So my understanding is that power is the ability to influence other people with or without their consent. So an example of that would be at the political level, in your country and mine, that we choose who our political leaders are. We give, with our consent, power for them to make decisions in our interests, and we hope that they're going to do that. They don't always, but we've given them that power. Mm-hmm. But you also can have situations where people do things which impact upon our lives which without our consent. And really in the world today, when we look at globalization, which just means that the capitalist system has become worldwide, we know that a smaller and smaller number of people, primarily men, are making economic decisions which impact upon the majority of the world's population, and that more and more of the world's wealth is being concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. So right now, the recent Oxfam report talks about how 85 billionaires in the world today have more wealth than half the population does. If you sit and think about that those men have the capacity to acquire that much money to prevent wealth from being redistributed in the society, because men with power like that can pressure nation states to make decisions which in turn can harm the majority of the people in that society, because those heads of transnational corporations can threaten to remove those corporations from that country. And if the country is very dependent upon a small number of corporations to be able to produce the wealth to feed, clothe, and shelter its family, provide education, to provide health care, then what are you going to say when a transnational giant says, you don't give us what we want, we're going to go? So when you look at the world global system today, manufacturing in the advanced capitalist societies is shifting, because the transnationals are shifting, into the developing countries. So you look at India, you look at Brazil, you look at South Korea, which are beginning to become economic giants, or China, which has 1 billion people that it can pull into the manufacturing of products to sell back to the wealthier societies and around the world. And you've got the experience of China being here right now. Yeah. So you're looking at power. I didn't give consent for those 85 billionaires to control what's happening in the world today, so that the majority of the world's population is poor, doesn't have enough food, clothing, shelter, health care, clean water, clean air. You look at the best example of that is climate change. We know that the kind of production we're doing in the world today using fossil fuels, it's scientifically validated, is destroying the environment. The Bahamas will be underwater if this doesn't turn around. New York will be underwater. Miami will be underwater. The Great Lakes, where I come from, will be flooding into the city of Toronto. We know that that's what's going to happen as the ice in the north and the south melts. You and I didn't make that decision. We didn't give consent to those political and economic leaders to come together to wreak havoc on the environment. So now individuals are joining together in groups to begin to challenge with numbers. That's all working people have. Men and women, that's all they have, to begin to challenge the power of so few. So power is the ability to come back to it, the ability to control people, to make decisions about their lives with or without their consent. So if we bring it back to men and women, which is where we are. So what interests me, and part of what I do in my work, is why is it that men as a group have more power to influence people, meaning other men and women, sometimes without their consent? How has that come about? And it's come about because of the way in which property is owned and controlled in the society, the way in which the environment is owned and controlled in the society, and the kind of production that takes place in society, the kinds of profits that are made from it. Because profits are made by you and I working. Human beings work the land, work the equipment, work what has been produced by other human beings to create these products, and then they're only paid a small amount of the value of what they produce. Or say even in the service sector, you're only paid a small amount of the value of what you've produced. It's appropriated by this very, very small number of people. When that happens, the impact back on all of us is, because of learned ignorance, if I come back to the educational system, is we haven't really been taught to understand how and why this is functioning in the world, and what it means when we come back to our own lives and our own community and our relationships with other men and women. We've been taught to direct our hostility inward at one another. So you get annoyed at the female worker beside you because you think she's taking away your job. Too many women in the workplace. Or if in my country, you'll hear people talking about too many immigrants. Or in your country, you'll hear them talking about too many Haitians, right? Too many immigrants. But that's the problem. The problem is who plans the economy, what's done with that wealth that's produced in that economy, what kinds of systems of accountability exist, problems in my country, the problems in your country, so that you know that when you give permission, like politicians, to make decisions, that they in turn have to control capital and what's being done. But capital is so powerful now, it's very difficult for politicians to do that. Plus, capital can buy off politicians. So we're in a world that's swirling around with growing and growing, deepening economic poverty, deepening conflict between ethnic and racial groups, deepening conflict between men and women, not to benefit you and me, not to benefit us in our personal relationships, because we know the world's population is getting poorer and poorer, to benefit a few.
Right.
Power.
Right. And that is such a scary, scary thing. And then to move away from, I suppose, focusing on women and their sense of powerlessness and just trying to get a fair shake. Men also feel powerless.
Yes.
They feel powerless even though, as you said, as a group, they may have more power than women do. But some men, perhaps more on a personal level or beyond, feel a sense of powerless because of the emergence of laws and sensitivity toward women. Like you talked about resentment of the female worker, or going to court, in maybe a failed relationship, or they may not have been married, but they have children together, and the man would like to have equal access to his children, not to just be mandated to make a financial contribution to the children, but to be present. And they feel disadvantaged because they feel now that because of the shift, I don't know if it's in power, but at least in awareness and sensitivity toward women, that they're now being disadvantaged. What would you speak to that?
I'd say that they don't understand the history of how this has come about. Because if you've gone to society that has created a division between the male and female genders and has said that women's place is in the home taking care of the children, and men's place is out there making the money and then helping out. And the reality of the world today is not that, is that most men are economically powerless because they don't control how much they get paid, whether they're going to be full-time or part-time, what the conditions of work are, whether they're going to be laid off and brought back, especially this whole shift in the world towards casualization of labor where there are fewer and fewer full-time jobs. So in the area where men are supposed to be strong, what they've been taught as ideology is becoming difficult for them. So the laws that originally were created coming from a society that was male-dominated, and I'll use the word, a patriarchal society, when you have laws, and if we look at your Constitution, where sex is not sitting in there as one of the grounds that where you should not have non-discrimination, that can benefit men as well as it can women to have that in the laws. Because if that sits in your Constitution as an equality right, then your legal system has to implement that in its laws, and the justices have to interpret that.
Right.
So if men are being discriminated against when it comes to participation with their children, you have the framework and the Constitution and the laws to give you that. It also requires the responsibility of men to pay their way to help look after their children.
Right.
You want access? Yes, that's one thing, but you also have a responsibility. But you can't expect that that's going to be handed over to you when historically you've left it over for the women to do all of that. So you have a contradiction that's built there. Right. You need the broad equality rights in order to have the implementation of equality rights. So yes, men are powerless in the economic system today. Yes, in certain aspects of the legal system, they will have less power than women do when it comes to having access to their children. And do I think it's right? No, I don't. But you got to change the structures so that it works its way through in the system.
Right. So what would you say then is, and I'm shifting again to, I guess, as we look at power and power demonstrated in women, what would we define as femininity? Because I think that also plays a huge part in the struggle that women face, right? What does it mean to be feminine? Does it mean that you are either weak or meek and quiet and gentle? Does that mean that you have to show all your body parts and be sexy, right, in the way that you dress and present yourself? What does it mean to be feminine? What is femininity?
So femininity and masculinity is culturally defined, meaning each culture will have its different ways of working with that out. So what it is in Canada would be different than what it is in Bahamas. I see it by moving between both worlds. I've also lived in Trinidad and Tobago for a long time, so I've moved through different countries. I don't know if there's a clear definition of that. The definition comes from those who have the power to transmit the images and the content to us, which is the mass media today. That is the major institution that is teaching young people what it means to be male and female. And that mass media is controlled primarily by America. So it's American cultural, the word that they'll use.
Culture.
Yes, and they'll talk about cultural imperialism, but it's American culture, which is around the world right now. We may well see in our lifetime Chinese culture, which will be around the world.
Yes.
But right now it's American culture. So when you look at the images that are being held today, which are different than even 20 years ago, highly hyper-sexualized images about females. That you compare that to men who have bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger clothes on. Occasionally they'll show the abs, but really they're covered with the gold and the women draping on them and the big cars around them. And if you listen to the language about the bitches and the hoes.
Gosh, yes.
And then you look at the women, who some of the very big stars like Rihanna or Jennifer Lopez or Beyonce, and you look at the emphasis that's placed upon the body, or Nicki Minaj, right, and certain parts of the body. The behind has become big now, and I think that's part because there are many more black women who have a different phenomenal physical structure, phenotype than what white women do. You see many more of them now in positions of power making money. But these images come from those who own and control the mass media. The mass media are owned and controlled by the people who control the economic system. So whose dream are you watching? Whose image of women are you watching? The image of very powerful older men and how they view women. So that image today is not the same image that we had in the past. I said a comment to you earlier on before we were talking that Marilyn Monroe would be considered fat today, and she would not be a sexual icon, whereas she was back in the 50s. So you have different kinds of images. Yes. That image has been pulled away. And even Beyonce, when she did her album that she released without any advance notice, has one of her songs in there talking about how hard it is to be beautiful. The things that she goes through to have to keep her body looking like that and to look like that after she had a baby. Most women can't do that. She has personal trainers and people cooking for her and working with her many hours a day to have her look like that, but that's the image that's held up. And also, do look at how her and Rihanna and Nicki Minaj have their photographs lightened. They're in the hierarchy of race. So what is beauty? Beauty has a racial component to it. It has an economic component to it. It has a male definition component to it. So it's very hard to say what is femininity. What it is not. I want to go the other way. What it is not. You are not supposed to be dominant. You're not supposed to be forceful, even though you've got Beyonce who runs a career. Right? You're not supposed to be aggressive. You are to adorn yourself. You're to be the peacock in the society. In other societies like the Maasai in Kenya, they are the peacocks. The women are not the peacocks. Different cultures have different genders or peacocks.
That's right.
So it shifts.
Because we were talking about that. We were saying, a woman, it seems like a woman always has to be on, for want of a better word, right? I mean, you can't just say, I'm going to just run out to the store. I'm not going to wear any makeup. I'm not going to look fancy. It's like this expectation that you always have to be looking sexy and well made up and just on your game.
To attract the male.
To attract men.
Men don't focus so much on looks. They focus more on the size of their wallet. That's what women have been taught to look for in men, is how much do they have that they can give me, take care of me. Men aren't socialized the same way to say how much does she have to give me, take care of me. They're socialized to think about what has she got to offer me in a particular look that the culture is teaching me that I should be interested in. Now, it's going to be different in the Bahamas than it's going to be in North America because you're also dealing with a different racial dominant group with a different kind of body type. But you are still being influenced by North American. And it's about money. They're selling you an image. If we want to look at this, it's an image. To look like that, what do you have to buy? It's tied into capitalism. It's tied into commodities to get you to buy stuff.
You gotta buy health, you gotta buy makeup, you gotta buy clothes, you gotta buy shoes, you gotta buy jewelry, cars, whatever it is that's going to make you into this thing that they've created to benefit their world.
Because the system runs on stuff. If they cannot convince us to continue to buy stuff that's disposable, because you have to have this constantly happy, which is what's killing the environment right now. If you can't convince us that we have to put different shoes, different skirts, different nails, different hair, whatever going on, that men have to have different kinds of athletic shoes and athletic wear in order to be a man, and women have to be a particular way in order to be a woman, it's defined by capital. It's defined by commodity production.
Wow, this is so serious. And I was sharing with you off air, for me growing up in school, I grew up in the school that I went to was predominantly white in terms of the children that went there. I would say international, right? Because we had many different races and nationalities represented as well. So a lot of American, Canadian, Spanish, Arab, lots of different nationalities. And even within the Bahamian context, kids from Nassau, but coming from other family islands, but very wealthy families, right? My teachers were, I would say 99%, perhaps 100% from England, right? Maybe one or two American teachers, and all white. So for me, and I didn't realize that impacted me as it related to my body image, because the majority of the girls in my class were very slim girls. I'm talking slim like a size 2, a size 4, like the models that we would see, these images that you're talking about now. And so even though if I were that weight now, I would probably be pretty small, the weight I was in high school, but compared to them, I felt huge, right? I was very voluptuous. I mean, I still am. And so even at that age, I remember by the time I hit grade 6, I was already like full blown breast. I mean, I was not in a training bra. I was in like a bra, right? I mean, so I had that body image of a woman even at that age, at probably 11 years old, where I had people in my class, even my teachers, were not structured that way in their bodies.
The white foreign definition, because that's what you were living in, the white foreign definition of what was beautiful was different than the definition within your own culture if you had been in a predominantly black school.
Exactly.
So the definition of femininity for you was much more constrained than what it would have been in another environment. That's why femininity is culturally determined. Yeah. And I'm trying to argue to you it's determined today by capital.
Yeah, I believe
what
that.
Sells.
I believe that. And so now, when you struggle with those things about body image, the whole focus is on losing weight. You got to lose weight because you have to be at a particular size.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
Exactly.
Your
so
skin
health,
should be lighter,
fitness.
a multi-million-dollar industry.
Okay.
You need your hair straight to look like white hair, a multi-million-dollar
right.
industry.
Whether you process it or you buy it and put it on.
It's about commodities.
Yeah. Well, what a shame. And so how then do we teach not just femininity, but sexuality to our young people, both men and women, boys and girls? Because again, what is presented, and I'm truly disturbed at where music has evolved and the music video and the lyrics, because, we gyrate and, we get off on the music and the beat, but when you actually take stock in the words and how we are sexualizing men and women, you have songs out there that for a man, if he's been hurt by a woman, the language is I don't give an F about you, you stupid blah 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 B, I don't give an F about you. That's the song. I don't give. And obviously he's expressing hurt, whatever he went through with this female. That's his way of now blowing her off. So that's not teaching, how do I resolve this? How do I move past in a healthy way on to the next thing? I'm blasting this woman out, cursing her out or whatever, because that's how I feel inside. On the flip side, you have another popular song that's out there is that, I don't care if you swing on a pole. I don't care if that's how you make your money. I don't care if you're doing things with your body that I enjoy at home with you for other men for money. I don't mind that. Once you come home to me, do whatever you got to do to make the money you want to make. Now, that may sound empowering, but how does that impact the sexuality of the woman? On the other hand, you would hear a song by a female artist who's saying, the only way that I can get over you is if I stay high. the only way that I could deal with the pain of not being in a relationship with you is to stay high. Right? I mean, so these are the messages that are out there. Of course, when you talk about advertising and the beauty standards and all of the pressures that both boys and girls have to face to be, like you say, for men, when I talk to men today, they say, we don't even feel like we can give a woman a compliment anymore. Like you talked about, if a man is visual. I go to a bar, I go to a restaurant, I see a woman that interests me visually, and I want to go up and talk to her. I mean, it's really hard. It's hard.
Well, it's not hard if men begin to think about there's more to the female than how she looks. There's other ways of beginning a conversation with a woman besides focusing on her body.
So what do you say? Well, I think you have a great mind.
No, you can open a conversation in a variety of ways, which will let you understand who she is as a person, rather than focusing on her
physical
body.
appearance, right. Which is even what is drawing them, but it doesn't have to be the conversation starter, is what you're saying.
It can end up as part of it if she's interested, but you got to find out. So
that's what causes women to put that wall up, I think, and why they feel that it's difficult to approach women now. Because, as you talked about being in such a hypersexualized culture, any approach seems almost like harassment. It's like, I don't even want to hear this. I don't want to hear another comment about my body.
Well, I think that's the message. There's more to women than their body, even though that's what the pop culture is teaching. So I think that you started off by saying, what can you do?
How can we teach our sexuality to boys and girls, and as a result, men and women?
So I think it's done in a variety of ways, and some of these will not be what will be part of the Bahamian educational system or culture, but I think you have to start by being open with young people about sexuality, and that sexuality is something that is shared, not demanded. So that if you want to have, as you're growing, a healthy relationship with a female or a female with a male, it has to begin with respect. You have to know, and I'm saying to this, and I'm not anti-sex in this, I'm saying this, but I think if we're really talking about human rights, which is where we started, fundamental understanding of gender roles and how they developed, I think you have to teach young children respect for one another. One of the ways you teach it is through the educational system. Another way it teaches is by having positive role models. And that's difficult in the Bahamas and in my own country as families are breaking up more and more. And in your own country, you've got children having children. So it's hard for children to provide a role model when they themselves are still trying to figure out who they are.
Life.
So the educational system requires people who have been trained in areas of sex and sexuality to be able to, to openly explain to young children what it is. We start in grade 3 in my country. We don't assume that you shouldn't know, because not knowing is what gets you in trouble.
Exactly.
I would argue it's the knowing that begins to frame it for you. And you need, in all areas of life, that you talk about the rights of women, that you teach children to be media literate, so they can look at a commercial and you have a discussion with your parents, or you have a discussion in school, so you point stuff out and you show what's appropriate and what's not inappropriate in that. Every area of life that gives you some information about what it means to be male and female, you have a dialogue on. But to do that, people have to be educated. Your teachers have to be educated to be able to do that. Parents have to be educated to be able to do that. Religious leaders have to be educated to be able to do that. And to really understand what equality means, treating every member of the human species, regardless of their race, regardless of their sex and gender, regardless of their sexual orientation or their ability or their age, could go on and on, or their class background, treating them in a respectful, healthy, egalitarian way. If you begin with that and you teach that, and in this country, which is predominantly Christian, you teach the values that Jesus was talking about. He was a feminist. He was a humanist. He dealt with women in a way that men at the time did not deal with women.
That's right.
Teach those values, but in a way that makes young people understand things will be better if you do this. Teach them to protect themselves so they're not having babies when they're young. Got to teach the ethics, the values underlying sexuality.
That's right.
And sexual behavior. It's not a simple answer.
No.
But where you have access to them is in the school system.
Right.
That's really where you can start to formulate minds and raise the changes. So the government has to be willing to invest money in the training of the trainers, of the teachers, who in turn can teach the kids.
Yep, absolutely. And hopefully even in our homes. But as you mentioned, you know, the value system there and belief systems have changed so much that, you know, it's challenging. And I know, and again, referring to when I was growing up, we didn't talk about things like that. My parents were from a generation where you didn't talk about things like that. My mom went as far as giving me a book that passed through all my older sisters, and the title of the book was called On Becoming a Woman. But really it was just about the changes that you experience in your body. On what it really meant to become a woman, we never had that conversation, really. I mean, we've had it indirectly as I went through things, but it wasn't an open dialogue, as you talked about, of what the issues really are of being a woman or being a man. I think they had the complementary book for boys.
It needs to be mandated into the curriculum, and you need to have the resources there for the teachers to learn it. That is, we know, is what works to get the issues on the table. And then you're going to have to work that out, because there'll be some religious organizations that will oppose that, because we've had that in my own country too. But I want to come back to men, because that's really what your program is trying to focus on, good men and what they're doing.
Right.
In all of this, progressive men have to be a part of this. They have to be there to talk to other young men. They have to lead other young men. They need to get young men to look at young women differently, to look at their mothers differently, their aunts, their grandmothers, their sisters. Boys learn from role models, from progressive role models. So there's a responsibility for men to step up. Women have stepped up through the feminist movement with the help of some men, but men themselves have to step up and say, I want a different kind of world where my daughter will be respected, where my mother is respected, where my partner is respected. I don't want them to be assaulted. I don't want them to be harassed. I want them to be paid fairly for their labor. I want them to be educated. I want them to be happy.
And they need to step up for themselves. Because as we started the conversation, the context now is some men, as you call them, progressive men, have a challenge being authentic, because that isn't even accepted. A man that does take responsibility, a man that is focused, a man that is inclusive, a man that is supportive, a man that is emotional, right? So even as I broached this whole The Good Man campaign, and I started to reach out to the men that I wanted to interview initially, they were like, you're going to have a hard time with this from men, because that is another area where they feel powerless and they're not stepping up because it's not okay to step up for them.
Yeah, but they're going to be pioneers.
Context.
There are men who are prepared to be pioneers, who are prepared to speak, who are prepared to be role models, and they in turn will influence the other adult men around them.
And as you talked about, these social movements all come from a collective mindset that we need change. This has to change, and that is the catalyst for me. I mean, my whole thing is about change, and so wherever that change needs to happen. And this is based on my personal experiences, people that I know, the things that they go through as a man, as a woman, as men and women in relationships, as children. You know, in my work with young people, I hear them how they talk about, you know, the challenges that they face as a child in a parent relationship. So many different dynamics that I believe this strongly impacts. So do you have any closing thoughts? Because you kind of went into it about the responsibility of progressive men, but where do you see us going from here? What are your closing thoughts for us?
Let's go back to the beginning, which is men, women, and feminism. So there is no one kind of feminism. Feminism is understanding the need for men and women to be equal in all areas of life. And all of us have to figure out from where our location is in life, what we can do with those who are around us. So I can impact through education, because that's the door that was open to me. You can impact through the media, that was the door that was open to you. Somebody else, it may just be mentoring, and I don't say just in a negative way, I mean important. It may be mentoring a young male or a young female in their family. Each of us has to look at what is it we can do to make things better, given the much broader structures we have around us which are constraining that. What can we do to question and challenge? And if you take that framework and you apply it to every aspect of your life daily, and you look around and you find out what you can give to others, you change, because that's what a collective social movement is. people of like mind doing like things.
I love that. I love that. And for me, that gives me hope. So thank you so much, Professor Jean Golden, for being with us here on Ready for Change, talking about men, women, and feminism. And you can look forward to seeing her on our official documentary on this subject. And I am so excited about this movement that we are initiating right from our friendship. Thank you again.
Thank you. Much love, Simone. Doing great things.
Thank you. So are you. And I consider you a mentor to me.
Thank you, sweetheart.
We'll be right back after the break.
Hey, Chef Jovi here of the Eatsperience Radio Show. Join me 10 a.m. every Thursday to explore recipes, best restaurants, and food spots in and around the country. I look forward to receiving your comments, so follow us on Spreaker.com to tune into the show. That's SPREAKER.com. And search MWHY Radio to join me every Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Eatsperience Radio Show. And remember to share your Eatsperience.
Hi, this is rockstar entrepreneur and international business consultant Erica A. Murray. Tune in to Simone Elbow, host of Ready for Change Radio on the May We Help You Radio Broadcast Network. She has the strategies to move you from stuck to successful. And if I were you, I wouldn't dare miss it.
Hi, my name is Letitia M., owner of May We Help You Network. I want to thank you for joining us and enjoying our host here on MWHY Radio Network. Please visit us online at mwhyradio.com and like us on facebook.com/MWHY Radio. Tune in to learn more about our host and upcoming contests and our TV programming that'll be coming to you soon. MWHY Radio, bringing together business, community, and you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the show, friends, family, and fans. Listen, this is such an important conversation, and I feel that every conversation we have is just taking us to new levels and depth of the conversation and the things that we need to talk about, the things that we've shied away from, and the issues that I think, instead of dividing us, can actually bring us together if we really talk them through, if we really try to seek understanding, and if we really try to offer support, and most importantly, to give respect. You know, women have demanded respect over the years, but I believe that men deserve respect as well, regardless of what may have been transpiring between us as men and women, what men may have done and what women may have done. At the end of the day, we need to be able to work together. We need to be able to harmonize and synergize. The human race demands it. Our communities demand it. Our nations demand it. Our world demands it. And so here on Ready for Change, where we are focused on not just talking change, but living change, we invite you to be a part of this conversation, to be a part of the transformation. And as we continue to release these shows and to release the subsequent things for the Good Man campaign, we have some things that will be released to social media. Follow us. Get a part of the conversation, and most importantly, live the life. Be respectful, be supportive, be understanding of the people in your life. Trust me, we all need that. We're, as human beings, that's our leveler. We all want to feel loved, we all want to belong, we all want to feel important, we all want to be heard, even men. I'm your host, Simone Elbow, for Ready for Change, where we ask you the question, are you ready for change?
Take my heart, Lord, 'cause I'm really desperate for change. I don't wanna be the same. No, 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 no. I am crying out to you, 'cause only you are able to make me brand new. Lord, I'm ready for change. I can't keep living like this. I don't wanna be the same. Lord, I'm ready for change. From the inside out, I don't wanna be the same. Falling and tripping, making the same mistakes. I can't continue living my life this way. Constantly going astray.